In today's Apple Daily, I'm answering your questions. That's assuming you're one of the 4 people who asked one. So the odds are you're not. So they're not your questions, but you're welcome to hang out with us anyway. We're all friends here.
Your Apple questions answered. It's iCaveAnswers with iCaveDave.
Thanks Siri, and in today's video, because we're in that no man's land between Christmas and New Year where nobody knows what day it is because nobody's at work, there's very little news because, well, nobody's at work. So if you have a question at all, use hashtag iCaveAnswers with your comment so that I know that you want it to be answered in the show. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so that you don't miss out on our next video. If you do that, also let me know in the comments so that I can give you a shout out at the end of that video. But for now, let's get into the questions that we have on hand. First off, Tech Hyped says, hey, how are you and have you ordered your M1 yet? So for those of you that aren't aware, last week I actually had a couple of days off of the channel, which is very rare for me. Since August I have done 5 days a week videos and probably a couple at the weekends most weeks and maybe a live here and there. So it was a bit of a weird thing to not be making videos last week, and it was because I got a randomly raging temperature, ended up having COVID tests and ended up having some antibiotics because it looked like I had some tonsillitis. I am recovered now. Thank you all for your very kind messages. But getting on to the more Apple side of this question, have I ordered my M1 yet? Yes. So I've got the M1 Mac Mini on the way. It's the base model, the 8 gigabytes, 8 core with 256 gigs of storage, and that will be replacing the iMac that is behind me right over here as my main editing machine, which is going to be interesting. Go from 24 gigs of memory on this thing down to 8 gigs of memory on the Mac Mini, but by all accounts it's going to be absolutely fine in terms of the performance and everything else like that. It does mean that I'm going to have a bit of a test bench where I can play around a lot more with stuff. My wife has got an M1 MacBook Air, so I've played with that a little bit, however not as a full-time thing. This Mac Mini is going to be on my desk all the time, so if there's anything you want to see me try on this, I'm going to try a few different games, see what can run already, what is running through Rosetta, what's running natively on Apple Silicon, so there's going to be a bit of that. The Mac Mini M1 is a little bit of a weird option as well, because big chunks of what is great about M1 is the battery life is huge, and obviously that doesn't make any difference for the M1 Mac Mini. With Apple's stuff in general, the build quality is always great, but does it actually matter how great the build quality is for something that just sits on your desk? Now I want to kind of display it a little bit, so we will probably find a way of standing it up and making it look quite funky on the desk, but in terms of the build quality, you're still paying for that, but you're not really kind of handling it as much as you would with a laptop. Also, the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro have both got their displays included, so they've got those P3 wide colour gamuts, and I have kind of an old TV up here and another display that I bought secondhand at the back, which is basically the 2 displays that I'll be using initially. The plan is, however, that I will look to get a lowish cost 4K TV at some point in the near future. It looks like for about £250 here I should be able to get a 43-inch, which gives me essentially 4 1080p displays worth of screen real estate in one panel, which I think might be a pretty good experience. But if you've had experience of 4Ks versus ultra-wides, please let me know how you found them in the comments. Ultra-wides tend to be like 2 1080p's next to each other, and this will be like 4 squared up, so interested to see how that will work. I quite like the fact that it's going to be a bit bigger because I'm not as worried about having that Retina display resolution. I would rather have the extra screen real estate, so I will kind of run it at the same sort of pixel density as this thing, I guess. But thank you, Tech Hyped. Appreciate your concern. Next up, Suvik Mukherjee asks, I'm curious to know whether Apple will bring on-screen fingerprint sensor along with the existing Face ID on next year's iPhones if they find themselves satisfied with that thing's security. So I guess you're asking if the Touch ID in the display is going to be as secure as it was with regular Touch ID or Touch ID as we have it now on the iPad Air. And I don't think Apple would put it in there unless it was as secure. That is one of the big things that Apple is very, very hot on, is security and privacy. So I can't imagine that they're going to put something into one of these devices that is less secure than it was before. Now, the reason that we're looking at getting Touch ID back, and it's probably, I would guess, going to be going into the Pro models, I can't imagine it's going to go across the whole range, but we never know. As we get a lot closer to the release of iPhone 13, we will hear a lot more about that. But that being said, the main reason that it's coming in is because at the moment, obviously, a lot of people are wearing face masks. It doesn't look like it's going to be a short-term thing. It does look like we're going to be doing it for the long haul, and that's absolutely fine, but it is less convenient for unlocking your phone with your face. Bringing a Touch ID option back to these phones would be a really great idea, because I personally wouldn't want to trade down to a iPhone SE just to get the Touch ID back, so it makes all the sense of the world for me that they're going to add this back in. In terms of security though, I don't think there's going to be any issues, and I think for people that are very security conscious, there might even be an option to require both Face ID and Touch ID in order to open the device. Hopefully that answers your question. If I didn't hit what you were actually asking me, I apologise, and do let me know again down in the comments. Next question comes from the official Team B. Do you think that Apple glasses will replace iPhone, or will there be an accessory like Apple Watch? And I have to say, I think the Apple Watch is a really good comparison for these, because at least for the first generation, they are not going to be something that you can use on their own. I would actually assume that the vast majority of processing will actually be done on your iPhone rather than actually on the glasses themselves, because as much as anything, most of the frame, I would guess, will be containing batteries. There's not going to be a huge amount of space in there for putting processing chips and that sort of thing. However, obviously we can do it with AirPods, but again, they're kind of a receiver that is not doing a lot of stuff on board. The Pros a little bit more so with the noise cancellation and the spatial audio and that sort of thing, but with the regular ones, not a huge amount going on board. But yes, I think it will certainly rely on the iPhone quite heavily to begin with, and then I think down the line, just as it's happening now with the Apple Watch, they will become more and more independent. Now, the fact that you can get an Apple Watch that has cellular built in, you can get an Apple Watch which you can set up without having an iPhone particularly paired to that watch as well. So with the new family setup that's been brought in for Apple Watches, so that other members of the family, children for example, can communicate with their parents using a cellular Apple Watch, is a really interesting take on it. So whether Apple Glass will start off using cellular, or if it will purely be a ad hoc connection to your iPhone, I'm not 100% sure. I think they will probably add both in future, but I think at least initially it will be very much a add-on device rather than a replacement device for the iPhone. I don't think in the next 5 years you will be replacing your phone with a set of AR glasses, but Apple loves proving people wrong. And finally, we have a mammoth question from Joe Garcia, which he didn't actually create as something for me to answer on the show, but I got in touch with him, asked him, and he's very happy for me to answer it. So, Joe Garcia says, thoughts on upgrades to the existing Mac Pro machines? This is targeted at the low-volume, high-cost professionals who invested in bleeding-edge, upgradable Mac systems, so price isn't as much of an issue as Mac performance. The reason I ask is that a typical 5-year or so lifespan for the machine would be hard enforced by lack of x86 support in the OS when that time comes. So is there a reason for or against considering an Apple Silicon Frankenstein path, like a PCIe card that gives ARM compatibility at speeds beyond Apple Silicon, iMac, for running apps reverse Rosetta via hardware or VMs? Maybe even a technique to bootstrap it into native ARM mode with peripheral and PCIe support, reminiscent of the PowerPC upgrade that inserted into the cache slot for a few 68K Macs. Or is this all a crazy idea and there's no reason to think that professionals would want further investment than what they have access to already? This is kind of a big-ish question. It's one that I think we've kind of touched upon in the past in my first Apple Silicon Timelines video, where I thought they would be coming kind of at the September iPhone event, which then got pushed back and then they got stripped out of it. I actually do still think that the original intent was to launch Apple Silicon with the iPhones if they'd had an in-person event. But moving on from that, I actually do think that it would be a great thing if you could get an ARM card and insert it into the current Mac Pros. I'm not sure that it is something that is physically possible. I am not a systems architect. I don't know exactly how the different layers would work together. It does seem that it wouldn't be that difficult to have, even if you had a card that basically just interfaced with the motherboard and just gave itself access to I/O and power supply and things like that, and basically everything was just built into that card. So you had your Apple Silicon SoCs built onto there. It had its own cooling system, its own memory and that sort of thing, but it could also then, as we mentioned in yesterday's video, it could tap into additional memory that is off of the main chip as like an extra level above. So you'd have like your L1, L2, L3 cache, then you'd have your integrated memory, and then you would have this external memory, which would be the biggest but also the slowest of the memory that it had access to. In terms of speed and things, I think if Apple just wanted to give developers that had the expensive Mac Pro hardware access to Apple Silicon, surely there would be a way that they could plug in, I don't know, if they have an iPad Pro, being able to connect that over USB-C and actually run their code, if they're an Xcode developer, for example, executing their code on the chip that's inside the iPad Pro, but obviously controlling everything. So it would look a little bit like running it in the simulator on Xcode, but you would actually have physical hardware there and you would be running it on a physical processor, so it would be a little bit closer to reality in terms of debugging and that kind of thing. Whether you could do that the other way and kind of use an external iOS device as a slave to bring ARM into the Mac Pro itself, I don't think that would be possible, which is sad because I think it would be an awesome idea as well if you could have like an array of iDevices that are all kind of just giving their compute power to this Mac Pro in order to run the tasks that it needs to run with Apple Silicon natively. I think that would be a really cool idea, but I don't think it's going to happen. In terms of the Mac Pro itself, it's very difficult to know because I don't think Apple intentionally sort of puts out a platform like that in order to screw people over. I think those are going to have software support, and I think actually that Apple is probably going to give about 5 years worth of macOS support to its existing Intel stuff, because at the moment they're still even selling Intel stuff, so they're not going to stop it in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. I think 4 to 5 is probably the very shortest period of time that they will stop supporting them completely. But you will start to see that more and more features that are built into macOS just won't work. You already have things like running iPhone and iPad apps natively on Apple Silicon systems, which aren't available on Intel. And as time goes by, more and more of the macOS system will probably be built around what the hardware can do, rather than being a kind of vanilla system that is designed to run almost like Windows does on kind of whatever hardware you've thrown at it in terms of x86 stuff. This time it's going to be very, very tightly integrated, just like with iPad and iPhone, to run purely on the processors that they have designed specifically for it. So that's where the difference is going to come, and that will force a lot of developers over because certain functionality won't necessarily be available to them on Intel systems. Now, if you are a video editor and you have your workflow all set up and everything works great for you on the Intel versions, it will continue to work great for you on the Intel versions exactly as it does now. And also remember that those Intel systems will have the opportunity to run Boot Camp, which the M1 systems will not. I mean, there's no guarantee that they won't bring ARM for Windows as a Boot Camp option in future, but I don't think it's the plan. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer, but I appreciate you asking it. And hopefully that's given you some insight into what I think Apple is likely to do in the future. So, as I say, a very different show today. Do go and check out our big 2 2021 videos that I've put out in the last couple of days. So you've got the first one, which is talking all about iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, Apple audio stuff, which is linked just up here right now. And the second one, which we put out yesterday, is talking about Apple TV, and then MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, Mac Mini, iMacs, which we think will be coming fairly soon, and also the Mac Pro that we've just been talking about, and the ridiculous amount of performance. We've done some mathematics and we have worked out what we expect the performance numbers to be in Geekbench, and we've kind of paired those up with some existing stuff, and unfortunately for the 32 core version we couldn't find anything fast enough to compare it to. So I would definitely recommend you go and check out that video, which is up there right now. That should be your next stop if you haven't watched it already. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to join that notification squad, make sure you smash the subscribe button and ring the bell and let me know in the comments that you did so with the hashtag notification squad. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.